Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, your space for black news, views, and opinions. Today is Wednesday, March 2nd. I'm Seth Lemon.
I'm Rochelle Ritchie.
I'm Romeo.
I'm Demi Lobo. And on today's report, the State of the Union is unity. President Biden delivers a stern warning to Russia over its invasion of Ukraine and lays out a four-part plan to get the country moving forward. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials say more than 2,000 civilians have been killed in the combat so far. Why the U.S. says it's still open to diplomacy but sees no path unless Russia pulls back. Then new reports show the Minneapolis Police Department continued to execute no-knock warrants even after the city's mayor banned the practice.
Plus, it's Women's History Month, so we're celebrating black female contributions to the world every day this month. And who's the highest paid in hip-hop? You may be able to guess a few, but we're giving props to black women who cracked the top 10 list.
We have all of that and much more. This is Our Voice and Our Truth, so let's get it.
President Biden's very first State of the Union address, it came as the American people face a myriad of issues. The commander-in-chief issued a stern warning to Vladimir Putin over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reaffirming the United States' commitment.
President Biden also condemned Putin's attack on the country and announced new sanctions against the Russian government. He then pivoted to the pandemic and the U.S. economy.
Joining us now on Fox Soul's Black Report to help us break down some of the notable takeaways from the president's speech is talk show host Mo Kelly. You can hear him on the Mo Kelly Show on KFI Radio in Los Angeles. Thanks for being with us today. First, I want to get your initial reaction. What did you think about the president's speech overall?
If I were to give it a letter grade, I would say B-, C+. It was a smart calculation to start the speech with Ukraine. You had a unified West, not only within the United States, but also Western democracies. So you had a feeling that there was unanimity behind the support for Ukraine. You saw blue and gold flags in the halls of Congress. So President Biden starting out with Ukraine was a good way to get everyone behind him. You saw Republicans and Democrats standing at the same time and applauding. And for those people who did not tune in for the full hour and 2 minutes of the speech, at least the first 10 minutes, they saw President Biden starting strong. And I thought that was a good choice on his part.
As a moderate president that he was chosen to be, it definitely was a moment where we saw him doing the uniting that he was supposed to be able to do between the two parties. But there were some political commentators who said he did not spend enough time on Russian invasion. He did speak for it, though, for quite some time. Listen to this.
Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared.
So he spent quite a bit of time talking about Russian aggression and reaffirming the West's response to it. Should he have spent more time talking about it? Should he be going further than what he's been doing publicly?
I think he could have spent more time, if anything, because that was a unifying force, not only the speech, but of the United States as a whole. And if he spent more time there, I think he would have gotten more goodwill from the speech. Now, if you want to make a historical comparison, this speech was more analogous to George W. Bush in 2003, when President Bush talked about the axis of evil and Saddam Hussein. But that was very different because he did not have a unified NATO front, and he had to make the case before the American American people. President Biden did not have that burden. He already had a united NATO front. And I think he should have stepped more into it, leaned into it more, and I think he would have gotten more out of the speech on the back end.
Russia, this battle is certainly leading the headlines, but President Biden also talked a lot about the economy. Let's take a listen to what he had to say. One of the things he actually discussed was a way to fight inflation and drive wages down. Obviously, we've seen black employment decline, which is great. It's gone from 7.1% to 6.9%, but still there's a heavy wage gap that persists. Does the president need to do more to address the wage gap that exists between black and white Americans in this country?
He absolutely needs to do more. And this is where I think we overstate the value of the State of the Union speech. People will not readily remember the words of the speech or any speech, but they will remember the results of policies. And if we are feeling inflation the way we are today in 6-7 months, then the Democrats will lose all sorts of seats and it'll become less likely for President Biden to be reelected. And not only the wealth gap, he only spent maybe five or six words or maybe 2 lines on voting rights. He didn't spend much time at all on policing as far as how it impacts African Americans. He needs to address the systemic inequity which confronts African Americans if he wants to retain our collective support.
There was a portion of the American Rescue Plan that went to PPP loans, and we've reported how people defrauded the government, some of them buying expensive cars, high-priced items with the money. It's got to be a big deal if the president decided to use a portion of his State of the Union address to announce appointing a special DOJ prosecutor to lead the hunt for fraudsters. Was this the appropriate time to talk about it, and is this the right move?
I thought it was the appropriate time to talk about it, but I don't know if it's on people's minds in the way that he would get something from it. I also noticed what he did not talk about. I noticed that he did not talk about the Capitol riot. I noticed that he didn't talk about how some Republicans did not support his efforts regarding Ukraine. And so the PPP fraudsters is important, and I think it is necessary to be addressed. But I think people are more concerned about whether the federal government, I should say Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is going to do his due diligence and make sure that what happened in those halls of Congress does not happen again. PPP is important, but I don't think it's on the top 10 list of people who were watching last night.
You know, Mo, Kelly, the president also discussed defund the police, but he made it very loud and clear that he was not in favor of actually doing so. He got a lot of loud cheers from Democrats as well as Republicans. And what's interesting is I'm not really sure why anyone is sort of surprised, because he actually has already come out publicly and said that he does not support defunding the police. But do you think it was necessary for him to say, we need to fund the police?
I do. I think that the Democrats lost a lot of ground and what I would call a strength that they would have done better in the general election in 2020 if they did not circle the wagons, as they say, behind defund the police. It's a complicated term. I think it misleads a lot of Americans, and people think that it was the wrong way to message such a complicated issue. And if anything, he's trying to, as they said, unite the country. And I think more people are behind the idea of creatively funding police as opposed to just saying we're going to take money away from police departments. And honestly, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're in a time of high crime or escalating crime. So you can't have those two ideas simultaneously occupy the same space of defunding the police while also decreasing crime.
So the president covered a range of topics. He talked about taxes, promising not to raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000. He also talked about COVID, talking about the test to treat program. And he talked about guns as well, making a joke about not seeing any deer in Kevlar vests. But what did the president miss last night? Representative Cori Bush called him out for not mentioning black lives at all. Was that a miss for the president? And what else do you think he should have addressed?
I think he should have been more pointed towards African Americans. As I said earlier, he did not really spend any time on the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. I don't think he mentioned it by name. He only spent maybe 1 line or 2 lines on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. He did not speak to African Americans in the way that he needed to shore up his agenda. And if we're going to go into this confirmation hearing with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, he needs as much African-American support as possible. He used a lot of his domestic policy agenda as part of his speech last night, and I thought that was a miscalculation. We heard a lot of rehashing of his stump speeches and phrases we heard before, which says to me he doesn't have the votes he needs to get anything done in Congress. And if he can't get it done, then the Democrats are doomed.
Yeah, we heard a lot of the same last night, a lot of the same legislation without the name Build Back Better being mentioned at all. Mo Kelly, thank you for being with us. You can catch Mo Kelly on the Mo Kelly Show on KFI right here in Los Angeles. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Russian airstrikes continue to destroy cities across Ukraine. The Russian military claims to have full control of Kherson, a major port city near the Black Sea. But Ukrainian officials dispute that and say the city of 300,000 is surrounded by Russian troops. If captured, Kherson would be the first major Ukrainian city to fall to the Russians since the invasion began last Thursday. Ukrainian officials say more than 2,000 Ukrainian civilians have died in the war. Russian and Ukrainian diplomats are planning peace talks in the coming days.
As the fighting continues for the second week, Pentagon officials say some Russian troops are surrendering to Ukrainian forces. There are reports some troops are poking holes in the fuel tanks of their vehicles. The Pentagon says poor morale and food shortages are contributing to entire units laying down their arms. Many of the Russian troops are poorly trained men who were drafted into the fight. Now, the Pentagon says Russians are running across Ukrainian forces who are putting up a tougher fight than expected.
The war in Ukraine is cutting off key supply chains. That's causing global companies to have to come up with new ways to get consumers the products that they pay for. Already strained because of the pandemic, the global supply network, it faces new and increasing pressures. Geographically, Ukraine, it sits between Asia and Europe, and normally computers and electronics fly from Asia over Ukraine. Now, however, they are being forced to reroute because of the conflict, and that's further elongating delays and increasing costs for shipping companies, which will likely trickle down to consumers. Delays for metals like platinum, aluminum, and steel have shut down European factories as well.
And in other news, President Joe Biden is rejecting the idea of asserting executive privilege to shield two former Trump advisors from testifying before the January 6th committee. The panel has subpoenaed former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Trade Advisor Peter Navarro. In a letter to Navarro, White House lawyers said asserting executive privilege is not in the national interest. Navarro emailed back saying the investigation was nothing more than a witch hunt.
Local governments around the nation are passing laws that would make it illegal to discriminate against people because of their hairstyle. But the U.S. House of Representatives fell short this week of doing the same thing. The Crown Act was able to win a simple majority, 235 and 188, but it could not meet the two-thirds threshold needed to move forward because of GOP opposition. Democrats say bringing the bill back up for another vote was the plan, one where they only needed a simple majority to get the bill to the Senate. This is something that always is very interesting to me. Why would there be anyone that is upset about black hair being an issue? And so shame on one representative. Her name is Colorado GOP Representative Lauren Boebert. We've talked about her here before. When she called out the bill, she called it the bad hair bill, which shame on her. But also I want to shout out, not shout out here, but recognize Roland Martin, who had time today, who called out the two black Republicans who also voted no on this. He called them out loud and proud on Twitter saying, hey, you're a black man. You're a black man. Why would you vote no on this?
Yeah, the Crown Act, we often think about black hair and black styles, but just personally, I faced this issue too as a news reporter, being told by news directors and executives to cut my facial hair because it made me seem less trustworthy on air. So the Crown Act covers a multitude of issues as it regards to things that are cultural norms for black people.
Yeah, I think about this has been going on for decades, right? And there was a story back in 2010, her name was Chastity Jones, had an offer on the table, right, to go ahead and get a job on one condition, that she cut her locks. When she refused, they took the table off, and the manager said to her, they tend to get messy. Imagine going to work looking your best, feeling your best, and for someone to degrade you like that, that's a problem. And this bill should have went through.
Yeah, and I want to comment really quick because this is very personal for me because I actually cut my hair off on television in 2010 to rebel against Eurocentric standards of beauty of what it meant to be on television news, and the story went viral. But it's at the point where people need to read our resume and stop looking at our hair.
Amen.
Well, a Pennsylvania man who was supposed to be sentenced for his role in the January 6th attacks has taken his life. Matthew Lawrence Perna pled guilty to 4 counts, including one for obstruction of an official proceeding. Perna's family members blamed his suicide on his arrest. They say he was a believer in QAnon conspiracies. Justice Department officials say Perna didn't enter into an agreement with them. He faced years in prison on the felony account.
A Minneapolis news station is reporting the city's police department has continuously barged into homes without warning, even after the city's mayor ended this surprise tactic back in 2020. According to police procedure, when cops apply for unannounced entries, as they're called, they were still required to let people know that they were cops before entering. Now, WCCO News says even though the procedure had been outlawed, MPD requested to use it in at least 15 warrant applications. The station reports that officers began referring to them as no-knock entries instead of using their official title on forms. Some of the forms they filed alternated use of the terms, requesting unannounced no-knock warrants. But the mayor's ban, it made a distinction between the two different terms, banning unannounced entries, but allowing no-knock warrants. It seems like a whole bunch of just confusion right there. Scrutiny of the issue, though, resurfaced after police murdered Amir Locke last month, a man who was not named in their warrants. Officers entered an apartment he was sleeping in without announcing themselves at all. It seems like they're trying to really parse this here to get around it without having to truly call it what it is. Either way, the practice in general should be banned. And I think there's enough evidence, enough lives that have been lost now to support that.
Absolutely. And, that's why so many people have rallied together protesting outside for Amir Locke, a man who a young boy actually, who should be here today. And so Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she actually just yesterday introduced the Amir Locke in Deadly No-Knock Warrants Act in Congress. And so she also says that she's going to be joined by Amir Locke's parents, Karen Wells, as well as Andre Locke as well. So hoping to see this go all the way through because, again, Seth, like you said, no-knock warrants should be banned. We've seen enough deaths. We don't need to see more of this.
Definitely should be banned. At the end of the day, accountability. These police officers need to be held accountable for their actions. When that really happens and they have to do the time when they really should or maybe have to pay that. When families get that money, usually the time the taxpayers have to pay it. The police officers just they don't have to, right? So let's try and get to the point where they're held accountable and then maybe we can get some things to be different.
And speaking of accountability, a former Louisville police officer who fired the fatal shot that killed Breonna Taylor took the Fifth Amendment yesterday in the trial of another former Louisville police officer. Lawyers for former Detective Miles Cosgrove advised their client not to testify in Brett Hankinson's trial for wanton endangerment. He's being tried for firing bullets that entered another apartment. Cosgrove's lawyers say their client would not testify because of the ongoing investigations into the event. Cosgrove was not charged, however, in the death of Breonna Taylor, who was killed during a no-knock warrant raid in 2020. But he was fired by the Louisville Metropolitan Department for not following police procedures. Now, Hankinson isn't on trial for her death again. So this is really interesting, the fact that he's not even charged in her death, but yet he is on the stand pleading the Fifth. And what's frustrating about it is that the other officers who actually fired those fatal shots that killed Breonna Taylor are not.
Nothing else left to say in this. It's just disrespectful at this point.
I mean, he was sitting on the stand, sipping his coffee, just did not care. There was no sympathy within this man at all. So we just are speechless.
Yeah, and he also said he felt like he did nothing wrong, which is crazy. I mean, you almost killed other people that were sleeping next door. So that is doing something wrong. Extremely disrespectful. New Kentucky constables may be required to get
certified as peace officers. A proposed law would require them to be trained in order to have the same powers as police and sheriff deputies in the state. The constable reform bill passed the Kentucky House of Representatives this week. The constable position was established in 1850. They run for their positions every 4 years. The position gives them broad powers to arrest and enforce both traffic codes and criminal codes, but they have a long history of misdeeds in the state. State investigators, they say constables have been fired for questionable arrests and other deeds. The bill now moves to the Senate for approval.
Georgia State candidate Herschel Walker is canceling a planned speech he was supposed to make at an event put together by controversial Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Walker's decision came just days after Greene spoke at an event sponsored by a white nationalist leader, Nick Fuentes. Some Republicans are criticizing Greene for appearing at the event. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy called her appearance appalling and wrong. The former NFL player is leading in recent polls of GOP candidates trying to replace current Senator Raphael Warnock.
Lawyers for 2 consulting companies say the Flint water crisis should be blamed on government officials and not its employees. 4 children are suing Veolia North America and Land Utilities. The lawsuit says the companies ignored evidence of contaminated water in the city's water system. Lawyers for the children say the high lead levels in the water harmed their clients' health, causing physical and intellectual damage. The state of Michigan and the city of Flint have settled a $626 million lawsuit with city residents.
Civil rights activists in Texas are asking the state's central school district to return more than 100 books it took off the school's library shelves last month. The books were banned by local conservative jurisdictions that don't want school kids learning about America's history on race. Conservative groups also object to having books in school libraries about LGBTQ+ issues. An estimated 125 books have been removed from schools since January. One state school district has already returned 103 books that were determined not to have explicit sexual content.